if you're in Germany. I'm Caroline Renaud. I'm the Executive Director of the GABA, the German American Business Association. Before we get started, we would like to kindly ask you to follow some guidelines to make this online experience a little more enjoyable for everyone. So please stay muted while the program is going on, because sometimes there are background noises that you are not even aware of. If you can, please also keep your camera on, because it's nice for our participants and speakers to actually connect to some of the faces in the audience. If you would like to ask a question, please type it in the chat box and we will see that the moderator can get to it later on. There will be an optional networking opportunity after the discussion. We will offer breakout rooms of about 4 to 5 people after the meeting, so you can connect to other people and get to know people a little bit better. And these rooms will be assigned randomly. So yeah, that's for the procedures. Just before we get started with the program, just wanted to say a few words about GABA, what we do, who we are. GABA is an alliance of corporations, organizations, and professionals with the purpose of strengthening transatlantic business. We are a nonprofit organization promoting business between California and Germany, and are only funded by membership and event fees. And usually we offer a lot of panel discussions, networking events, help people get connected. And since unfortunately at the moment we can't do that in person, we've been working on a series of online events and also networking events in an online format, because we want to stay in touch with our community and give our GABA members an opportunity to stay connected, exchange some ideas, and yeah, still yeah, talk to people. Yeah, I see that actually quite a few of you participants are GABA members. If you're not a GABA member yet, please consider becoming a GABA member, because yeah, that's our only way to keep things going like this. And I do want to say, for those of you here who are GABA member already, we really do appreciate the support in these difficult times, and we wouldn't be able to continue without you. And with that, I'd like you yeah, to introduce you to our moderator, Olaf Groth. Olaf is a CEO and founder of Cambrian Futures, and also a professor at Hult International Business School, and also an author of several books. So Olaf, please also introduce yourselves and the other speakers. Thank you.
I'm more than happy. Thank you very much, Caroline. And another great event organized by GABA that I think is very, very timely. Yes, my name is Olaf Groth, and Caroline has already introduced me very effectively. I teach at Hult, I teach at Berkeley Haas, and I run my own think tank, Cambrian Futures. We try to make sense of disruptive developments on the technology side. That includes digital, but that also includes clean tech. And as such, I'm very, very happy to have a very illustrious panel with us today and to be speaking with you today. And I will introduce them in a minute. Let me just say that this topic is one of utmost urgency. I think we are getting reminded on a number of fronts here. What you see behind me is not some rather unskilled attempt at being artful about my slide background, but what you see here is the piece of the ice shelf of Greenland that broke off last week. It's the size of Manhattan. It is very sizable, the biggest piece ever to be breaking off. The melting of this ice sheet in Greenland, it's the second largest behind Antarctica, is already contributing 1 millimeter of rising sea levels a year, and that's without pieces breaking off. So this break off here that happened last week, unfortunately, amidst all the noise in the United States of politics and Corona, did not make the news very much, but is a very, very significant and very urgent driver of the implications of climate change for us, and it will accelerate rising sea levels. That is really just one of the fallouts of inaction on the part of countries not mitigating climate change fast enough, and that's the core of the topic of our event here today, on how to accelerate solutions that are either ready to go or in the pipeline, and with, dare I say, a few $1 billion could be used to put this back on the right track. I have also shared with you in the chat function, I like to make things as interactive as possible, So please don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat function or address me personally if you like as well. I have shared with you there a great piece that was published last week on ProPublica that is an interactive map. I think it was also featured by the New York Times on where in the United States, literally county by county, not just rising sea levels, but the confluence of heat and humidity and the resulting economic fallout, literally county by county, where that'll be happening. You can look up the county that you live in. I know that some of you are joining us from Germany, so I'm sure there are corresponding maps there, but it is very striking when you go through these maps and you look at just how dire things will become over the next 20 years. That hits home quite literally. So we can look up, I live in Alameda County in Berkeley, we can look up the implications of climate change for Alameda County specifically. And so the scientific team, the science team behind this has done a great job at outlining this. So that's the call to urgency. And then when I see, and our first panelist, Eike, will talk about this, when I see that you know, we're already at cost parity between various renewable energy technologies and fossil fuels, then you know, you can only scratch your head as to why we are not forging full steam ahead into that. Now, obviously, there are answers to that. Some of them have to do with policy, some with politics, some with, you know, false notions of economic and business development. We have Nicole joining us on the policy front, who, like me, straddles sort of the economic and the energy and clean tech sides of things. And we have Horst Simon, who is joining us as Deputy Director of the Berkeley National Lab, who can tell us what kinds of other solutions are in the pipeline that we can scale out with, you know, more funding and accelerate to help us with this. So let me just give one quick headline here for each of our panelists before I let them introduce themselves here on Zoom in just about 30 seconds. So again, we are going to be starting with my friend Eike Weber, who is the co-chair of the European Solar Manufacturing Council. Eike is a fellow professor, is a professor emeritus at Berkeley, and has led various entrepreneurial ventures in this space, as well as held leadership roles in Germany at renowned research institutions. We have Horst Simon, who is, like I said, the deputy director of the famous Berkeley National Lab, overseeing research and R&D there. I've been a long-time contributor to that science, very well known. And we have Nicole, who is the chair and co-founder of Environmental Entrepreneurs E2, at the intersection of technology, entrepreneurship, and policy, really driving home with policymakers that we have solutions, we have talent, we have money, let's go. And she will be wrapping the panel up on the back end with a case study on agriculture, which I think is very illuminating. So with that said, may I ask Eike, Horst, and Nicole to maybe just say 30 more seconds on your background, because they're so impressive and so relevant.
Well, thank you so much, Olaf. To be very brief, I am a physicist from origin, a PhD in Cologne, but in 1983, I came to Berkeley, first as an assistant professor, and I immediately started as well to work at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So I had my legs in both places. In 2006, I changed to Germany back, and I became director of the Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy Systems, which grew at that time from 500 people to 1,200 people. And this institute, of course, is devoted to the renewable energy transformation process in photovoltaics, in energy efficiency, power electronics, hydrogen technologies, all of this. And today, I am the chair of the European Solar Manufacturing Council. And the objective of our grouping is really to bring PV production back to Europe. And I think this is an issue we share between Europe and the US. And I'm happy to talk about it if we have a chance later in our meeting.
Excellent, thank you. Horst, over to you.
Thank you, Olaf, and thank you for the invitation. So I want to thank Olaf for pronouncing my last name the German way, Horst Simon, and not Simon, as it's usually done in the US. So I am originally from Franconia. I grew up in Germany. I came to Berkeley in 1976 as a graduate student. Had my promotion in mathematics, and then returned to Berkeley, running the computing center, the supercomputing center, which is my expertise. And as almost all of the science today is doing computing, my next step was the deputy director for research at the lab. So computing connected me to all scientific applications, in particular also to the energy applications. So as the deputy of research at the lab, I'm currently overseeing all the research at the lab, which is from basic research in energy to very applied energy technologies.
Thank you very much, Horst. And Nicole, please take it away.
Good morning, and thank you. Olaf, as you said, I'm founder of Environmental Entrepreneurs, E2. I founded the organization some 20 years ago for the purpose of creating what did not at that time exist, which is a platform for business leaders to advocate for environmental policies that grow the economy and create jobs. And since that time, we have worked in many sectors where environment and economy overlap. That has included oceans resources management, transportation, land use planning, water, climate change being the overarching issue that has become more and more apparent with every year that passed. Every single issue that we work on intersects with climate. And so we've been very involved in advancing clean energy, whether through renewable technologies, transmission, storage, and most recently, and especially in the last 3 years, we've been very focused on a topic that is only recently being recognized as essential for combating climate change, and that is carbon removal. And today I'm going to talk about the natural systems by which to remove carbon from the atmosphere as opposed to simply reducing emissions.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicole. We're looking forward to that. I want to mention three other people. We already heard from Caroline, who is the head of GABA. I'm now looking at Tracy Gross, who is my Clean Tech co-chair and who really, frankly, instigated this event with Michaela Ballek of GABA and Ivy, who is helping us execute it. So thank you to the three of you. You're sort of the eminence grise behind, or maybe I shouldn't say grise, fresh and bright behind this event. Thank you so much for that. With that said, I think we want to go right into the content. We're going to have 5-ish minute lightning talks by all three panelists. And then we're going to go right into Q&A to keep it nice and lively, right? Because I can understand how people are thinking, the last thing we want is one more Zoom call where people keep droning on. And so our panelists are excited to give you the best of their thinking in a very compact format. The first one will be Eike, who is going to talk about the cost parity of solar, the huge opportunity of that and some other technologies that are already in the making. And creating that awareness amongst us that we are already off a good starting block. So let's accelerate. All right, over to you, Eike.
Yeah, thank you so very much. I think we all have learned that we are really in a very, very critical decade, because by 2030, we might reach tipping points. If we have not acted during this decade quickly enough, we might really have things like the permafrost melting, the coral reefs dying, the Arctic melting. What Olaf has shown here goes in this direction. So there is no time to lose. We have to act. We have to act fast, and we are happy that we have this big movement, Fridays for Future, to give us fire under the belly. I think there are 5 topics which need to be addressed. And the first one is, of course, the most rapid replacement of fossil fuels by renewables. The second one is decarbonization of industry, because steel production, concrete production contributes a lot to our CO2 emissions. The decarbonization of transport is point number 3. Then comes the point carbon capture, and this is what Nicole will address. We have to reduce the CO2 already in the atmosphere. And the 5th point is energy efficiency, because each energy we don't need, this will be good. But let me start with the renewable energy. Photovoltaics has had an enormous development since 1992. Actually, we experienced a sustained annual growth rate of 38% per year. And if we extrapolate this, it means that we will come from the current 100 gigawatts of PV installation, 120 is a precise number, by 2030 to 1.5 or even 2 terawatts of production. So what we have in photovoltaics today is just the beginning of what we will experience during this decade. We use crystalline silicon technology, but we have different technology generations. We have started with what we call industry standard technology. We have 5 years ago introduced PERC technology, which increased efficiencies at lower costs. Today, we are in the transformation to so-called high efficiency technologies like heterojunction technology. And on the horizon, we already have the 4th generation, which will be tandem cells, things like perovskites on silicon. And with all of this, we have reached that we can install a PV system for much less than $1 per kilowatt. We have a levelized cost of electricity approaching 1 cent per kilowatt hour under sun-rich conditions. This means this will be the lowest cost way to provide electricity worldwide, period. And therefore, of course, it is not surprising that this is an exciting development, but we should make sure that we distribute the production of this PV worldwide. And this is what I promote very much in Europe, and we should as well promote it in the United States, because at present, 95% of solar cells come out of China from one single country. And this might not be good. We know for COVID how important it is where the value chain is. Second point in the renewable transformation is, of course, storage, because wind and solar, the 2 pillars of the renewable energy system of the future, are fluctuating. So battery prices are as well coming down very rapidly to below $100 per kilowatt hour. And of course, at the moment, this is mainly based on lithium-ion technology. New technologies might come up which don't use lithium, which don't use rare materials, and which have, of course, lowest possible cost. But the next point, the industry decarbonization, is as well a very big task which needs lots of innovations, lots of developmental work, because green hydrogen is not just needed in order to store energy and to bring it back at times we need it, but as well to decarbonize carbon and steel production, steel and concrete production. Without this, we would continue to develop enormous amounts of CO2 emissions. So there's a hydrogen just needed for energy, it's just needed for chemistry to bring the oxygen out of iron ore and to create steel out of this. Of course, the transportation sector, another huge challenge. At the moment, we are mainly talking about battery-based electric mobility. We can as well consider hydrogen-based electric mobility, because hydrogen is a very, very nice way to use it for transportation, because you simply can fill up your tank as fast as you are using it from the gas-powered gasolines. I don't want to talk about the 4th point, because Nicole will talk about it. We need to plant trees to bind carbon, which is already in the atmosphere, in order to avoid what I mentioned at the beginning, this catastrophic changes of the climate system and crossing the tipping point. And the last point, energy efficiency, is at the moment quite important. Down the road, we might have actually at certain times surplus electricity, because we need to oversize the amount of PV and wind because of the fluctuating nature. They are not always available, but this means in a good condition, in a sunny day, we have enormous amounts of surplus electricity, and therefore things like creating the green hydrogen, creating so-called power to gas, power to X technologies, this will come up. So a whole wealth of new technologies are either in the pipeline or are already on the market and have to be more efficiently produced and decreased in price. So altogether, this gigantic task of transforming our economy away from carbon emissions will be an enormous innovating, and countries which realize this. And at the moment, the United States is not in this club, but California is, and individual states in the United States are really, really very active in this, as is the European Union, many countries in Europe. India is waking up to this challenge. Japan is already well on the way. And then we need to go to Africa and to other countries. So a fantastic task for all of us working in technology. So we should see this challenge really as an opportunity. And I'm really looking forward. This decade will be the decisive one, but we have to start very, very quickly.
Thank you, Eike. You know, I can only second that, and we have very positive signals happening in the last 2 weeks. One from Governor Newsom, you know, setting a deadline for when new car registrations have to be completely based on renewables or electric, and combustion engines will no longer be allowed. Surprisingly, and you're probably closer to that than I am, Söder of the CSU in Bavaria has said, applause, applause to California. You know, we are quite similar. Yes. And in fact, as we all know, there are lots of exchanges between Germany and especially Bavaria and California.
I know Söder quite well, and he is one of the most interesting candidates for Chancellor after Merkel. So keep this name in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly in terms of clean tech and energy, because he said, look, let's do the same thing. That was a good signal. Let's do it.
Yeah,
Very good.
So he's from the Conservative Party, but the Conservatives can be more successful because they don't have to fight the other side of the aisle if they are really progressive.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because, you know, the nexus of environmentalism in Germany was, of course, the combination of conservative landholders who wanted hydro with the Greens, and that gave birth to a very pragmatic alliance between conservatives and Greens, right?
And Söder can maybe well be the chancellor of a coalition between the conservatives and the Greens. This is in the books quite likely.
Interesting. All right. Well,
just wait for next year for the election.
Yeah, we'll discuss that. We'll discuss that further, no doubt. Eike, I'm going to go to Horst now, but you know, one of the obvious questions that we could explore during Q&A is, you know, if we are in fact already looking so good, what does it take now to make that push, right? Yeah. So we talk about Söder, we talk about Newsom. What exactly do we need to do next in order to accelerate in this next decade? And I love the fact that you are calling this out. We have to get this done, scaled and impact generating by 2030, or it's game over.
Exactly right.
This is the decade, right? And in the meantime, by the way, we will continue to deal with fires and smoke and hurricanes and all that other stuff. And life will increasingly become unlivable in many parts of the US, as this graphic there that I shared in the chat shows. Great. Horst, over to you. What else is in the pipeline? If I could give you $1 billion, or let's call it $10 billion, you know, what would you spend it on?
So thank you, Olaf, and thank you, Eike. I want to make 2 policy points and then 3.5 now, because the previous discussion brought a half point up. So 2 policy issues or topics. So we are a basic research lab, and most of our work is 80% is in basic research, which is important, and there's continued to be strong support for basic research by the Department of Energy Office of Science. And then there's a question on how do we get from basic research to look at questions that are not usually approached by professors in the laboratory. This is where the national labs come in. We're doing a lot of the applied research. And again, about 20% of our budget that's coming from the Department of Energy is for applied work, and I will talk about this. But in particular, since we're talking about California, I want to thank the California Energy Commission that just renewed the EPIC program. And this is a program that spends about $200 million a year in the state. And it's from the state of California and can only be spent in the state. And this is a foundation for a lot of what is being discussed, since California as a state is moving a lot of the technologies that come out of the research labs into use thanks through this California Energy Commission, which is very enlightened and supports the policies that are expressed by the governor and by the state assembly. That's one important point. The second important point I'd like to make is that as a lab, we have invested a lot in innovation coming through entrepreneurs and started an entrepreneurial program called Cyclotron Road. Cyclotron Road has generated close to 50 startup ideas, and they have been all very successful. And what we see now from technology that was 5 years ago, sort of on the fringes, is now suddenly in the mainstream. And I'd like to mention one company called Opus 12, which was looking at carbon capture direct from air. And this is one of our star companies, so you can look them up. And so it's important to let innovators leverage the investment that is being made at the national labs and have them work on crazy new ideas, because they're willing to push these ideas. And I think in particular that the millennials and the post-millennial generations are very dedicated in using their research accomplishments to actually make change. So these are the two policy points. Now I want to briefly talk about 3 technologies. So it's well known that Berkeley Lab has been, and Berkeley has been, a center of biofuels, and there has been a lot of I would say, disenchantment maybe with biofuels, but I think that's actually just a temporary thing. And I think what is important to think about is now using the technologies that have been developed for biofuels to look into something that has gotten a lot of traction, which is called the circular bioeconomy. And this is to using biological processes, not just for fuels, but for materials, and taking biomass and bioproducts, which, as we will probably hear later from Nicole, are a natural way of capturing carbon and cycling them through and producing chemistry and materials through synthetic biology processes. And of course, biofuels will continue to be very useful in at least certainly in the interim. And so I'd like to point out one project that we have is for BioAdvantage products. So we're working with companies, aerospace companies, to make biofuel that can be added for aerospace. And this is, of course, one of the technologies where we have not yet made the progress that we, of course, would like to make with other low carbon emission technology. So there are also questions on where else we can use biofuels and bioproducts. And as a small example, I want to mention something that we have a project with the California Energy Commission and CAL FIRE to actually develop portable bioreactors that could be put on a truck and could pick up woody biomass in the leftovers from forest fire or clear out underbrush and turn this into bioproducts. And so this is one of those pragmatic California projects. The second topic I wanted to talk about is hydrogen. And I think that's the topic that Eike already started. And I actually think in the near term and in the long term, hydrogen is in particular hydrogen that is generated through direct electrolysis of water, and direct generation of hydrogen using solar energy is an important technology. There has been a lot of basic research done at our lab, and we have just received funding from the Department of Energy. So that's not in the $1 billion range, but it's a $60 million project for Liquid Fuel Sunlight Alliance, LISA, that is looking at basically a direct conversion of CO2 into useful chemicals using sunlight as the sole energy source. And so there is, of course, a lot of work to be done. And we know we have shown in the lab processes to generate hydrogen. But the challenges, and this is where the $1 billion might come in, to scale up these processes to an industrial level of production. And this is, I think, a big challenge going forward. So I just want to add the personal statement. I do believe in hydrogen, and I drive a hydrogen car, not a Tesla, because I think that actually there's a question that we should also discuss is the acceptance and the habit of driving to a gas station and replacing some tens of thousands of gas stations at the time that our governor is calling for complete zero emission cars is going to be a challenge in itself. And so hydrogen definitely fits in my mind into this picture. And then I want to talk about also a topic that Eike has already started, and this is negative emission technologies. And so we're looking at technology that would, as Eike said, capture CO2 directly in CO2 emitting processes in terms of cement productions and other large-scale industrial productions. And there are a number of projects that look at these. And so one is to use MOFs, metallo-organic frameworks, that again, the challenge is, it has been demonstrated in the lab, and the challenge is to do these projects at an industrial scale and demonstrate them efficiently. So this all can be done. So these were the 3 projects I want to mention. Now I'm coming to my 3.5 that I want to add, and this is that it is easy to say we're going to battery cars and electric cars, but the key technology element that's missing is the lithium, and the US is not very rich in lithium. Most of the lithium in the world is in China, in Argentina, and in Chile. And so, of course, an abundant source of lithium is actually in seawater. And so we're currently looking at technologies for desalination of seawater that, if they can be applied to look at seawater and extract lithium from seawater. Of course, there's plenty of lithium in seawater, but in very, very, very low concentration. So it's another technology challenge where I'd say, this is something, if we believe in electric cars, we need to invest more to find non-traditional sources of lithium.
Thank you. Thank you, Horst. Very illuminating. You know, it's interesting, last week, Elon Musk protested the, the import duties on Chinese goods because, of course, it inhibits his production of batteries and electric cars. You know, we often forget that part of the holdup is the geopolitics of things, not just on the technology side, but really on a lot of national security as well, right? So there are a lot of conflicting thrusts of themes here, like the trade war, and technology is at the center of that, quote unquote, Cold War 2.0, as bad of a label as that is. Yeah. I might come back around to you, Horst, after we've heard from Nicole, asking you 2 questions. One is, there were these famous trials between Boeing and Virgin Atlantic, the airline. Whatever happened with those trials? What's the status quo on biofuels, sort of scalable deployment in aircraft? And the second one is, how would we, does it take money to break through that? Well, what does it take? I know sometimes you cannot accelerate science with just throwing more money at it. But what else would be needed, especially in sort of a transatlantic context, yeah? So I'm just going to spin you and Eike up for those questions while we go to Nicole for her lightning talk. Nicole, over to you. Interesting confluence there of the tech with the entrepreneurship, the policy, looking at agriculture, exciting example that, for some reason is not getting enough attention globally, and it needs to.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for your comments so far, which have been really interesting. I think my goal for my fellow speakers today is to help you to focus on the technology development that needs to occur in the space that I'm going to talk about today. And interestingly, I think the purpose of this entire program was to talk about solutions that are ready to go right now, that are applicable. I'm certainly going to talk about agriculture in that context, but the technology challenge in this space is not about how to capture the carbon through agriculture. The technology challenge is how to measure the captured carbon so as to monetize it. And that is something I very much hope that organizations like the Lawrence Berkeley Lab will focus on. So to begin with, I would like to emphasize the difference between the primary area of focus for most climate scientists, which has to do with reducing the carbon emissions associated with our various industrial activities. And the opportunity to remove the carbon that is already in the atmosphere. Not only the opportunity, but the imperative to do so, which has become more and more clear. So looking at the task ahead of us to avoid further ice breakage, the opportunity to reduce carbon in the atmosphere is most obviously apparent in natural systems, as identified by a report several years ago by the IPCC. Agriculture globally represents an enormous opportunity to reduce that atmospheric carbon. But it is more than an opportunity to reduce that carbon. It is an opportunity to move the levers that we need to move to actually amplify and act on these opportunities. And those opportunities are policy and political, which are different. From a policy standpoint, there's a huge opportunity to create a coalition that has not existed in the past between business, environmental, and farm organizations to coalesce around a common goal. From a political standpoint, this represents a huge opportunity to bring the rural, farm, Midwestern, and other states that have heavy agricultural economies into the climate mix in support of national climate policy. So first of all, from a political standpoint, I led a coalition starting in 2017 of my organization, E2, which represents entrepreneurs, technologists in this space, at all different levels of sizes of businesses, from startups to Google, along with NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, of which I am a trustee, and then several major farm organizations, including the National Corn Growers Association, Minnesota Farmers Union, American Coalition for Ethanol, and we formed a core group supported by many satellite groups in all of those categories to craft and then advocate for, lobby for the addition of an initiative in the 2018 Farm Bill. That initiative was called the Soil Health Demonstration Trial, and it not only provides incentives for farmers to adopt the practices that are known to increase carbon sequestration through their agricultural processes, but it also allocates additional funding to developing and further refining the technologies used to measure that carbon removal. The goal is to create and define a new agricultural commodity, namely carbon removal, and that commodity should be something of value in the context that reducing carbon emissions has value currently, both in public and private markets, that creates a value stream for farmers that is not vulnerable to the same factors that create so much risk for farmers, namely commodity price swings, tariffs, and of course, extreme weather, which is happening on an increasing basis. It's interesting that those agricultural practices that sequester carbon the most, including no and low till and crop rotation, and other easily and long time known agricultural practices, not only create the climate benefit of carbon removal, but many collateral benefits to both farmers and the environment, including greatly increased potential for water quality preservation and air quality preservation, because all of these practices reduce the fossil inputs that go into agriculture. So not only does the Soil Health Demonstration Trial incentivize carbon removal, but also reduces the emissions associated with the crops that are produced in that way. So as I said, the policy opportunity that's before us now that we've already got the camel's nose under the tent in defining carbon removal as valuable, the next policy opportunities are myriad. Since the soil health demonstration trial passed, there have been many bills proposed to hugely increase the size of funding going to this initiative. To the point that, as I'm sure you're all aware, there was recently proposed a totally standalone bill by the ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee, Senator Stabenow, and also Senator Brown, completely bipartisan. This is a nonpartisan initiative. Everybody on both sides of the aisle think it's great. That specifically calls out this opportunity for farmers and seeks to increase the funding enormously. And it is very specifically a climate bill. So what we're looking at is, for the first time, no one is denying climate change in the discussion around agriculture and the potential for paying farmers to remove carbon. Suddenly climate change is a given, and there is no political argument around whether it exists or not. So that's a significant thing. The 2023 Farm Bill is what we're now focused on. It's by no means too early to take the river of billions that flow out of the Farm Bill in the United States and divert a significant amount of that to the type of agriculture that will be sustainable, both from a financial perspective for farmers and from a climate perspective. So I think I'm done. And the only thing I would say is that if we are able to achieve this in the United States, and specifically to achieve an improvement in the metrics around carbon removal, and which will have such a huge impact on developing the markets that will pay for this product, that this is an initiative that can go global very quickly, which we need it to do in order to achieve the objectives that have already been discussed on this call.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you to all my panelists. That was quite something, and I agree with Michaela here, and I see Bettina has also seconded it. That was a great talk, Nicole, thinking like a true systems thinker, right, about all the different parts that need to come together. Let me hone in on something you've said, that this is a revenue stream for farmers, and that on both sides of the aisle, it is, as it should be, a bipartisan issue, because it's good for the environment and it's good for farmers, and that should mean that farmers vote for people who put this kind of thing in place. But what are the hurdles to the 2023 Farm Bill? What do you see? What are the major hang-ups or potential obstacles, and how can we, as entrepreneurs, as scientists, as business professionals, how can we help?
I'll start with the latter, which is how can we help? The technologies involved here are, as I've already said, having to do with the measurement of the product. This is developing swiftly through aerial surveillance, and there are a significant number of our partners who were in the military and who are now deploying technologies they use for aerial surveillance in that context into detecting carbon in the soil. I don't know how many other potential technologies exist that could expedite what is a huge problem, which is that right now, the only way we can measure soil carbon is through individual soil samples, which is clearly not capable of amplifying and expanding deployment at the rate that we need it to happen. So a new paradigm for metrics. There are many other technologies involved on the other side, which is maximizing carbon removal. And that, as far as my direct experience, tends to focus on increasing the microbial life in the soil, increasing the proliferation of root systems. This is all in agronomy, not my specialty, but there are many different fields of science that touch upon how to maximize carbon removal. And by the way, the soil health demonstration trial is focused not only on crops. The language is written in such a way as to be applicable as well to forests or to grazing land management, pasture. So any natural system that can be managed in such a way as to create a delta in carbon retention can participate on a financial basis as this develops. And the first question, I'm already forgetting. What was the first part?
I mean, that was, you know, essentially what's the holdup? What's the obstacle?
The holdup always in advancing policy, and I'll speak specifically to the Farm Bill, but Farm Bill is new to me. I've spent my life working in the arena of energy policy. There's an enormous amount of inertia in terms of changing anything where there are many people who have a stake in the status quo. The most important criterion for success in policy advocacy is to define win-win circumstances for as many of those stakeholders as possible. This is why it is so important to have a coalition of stakeholders who can define the benefits that are directly to farmers, the benefits that are directly to the environment, and the benefits that are directly to the economy. And this brings me to one point that I think is really important to advancing policy initiatives. And that is something that my organization, E2, focuses on very directly and prominently, I would say, in the field, and that is job creation. There's a huge opportunity here in the development of new companies and new enterprises, including those that are located by definition specifically in rural communities, to create jobs around the proposal of regenerative agriculture. And those jobs, as I say, occur not only where the tech companies exist, but where they deploy their product. So to answer that question in one word, I would say coalitions. Yeah,
coalitions and I suppose deals, right? And we have seen similar conundrums with clean water technologies, right? Because we all subsidize, most countries subsidize water for good reasons, because we need it for human livelihoods and sustenance. But by subsidizing, you're taking out the margins for entrepreneurs, right? Who cannot go after certain technologies if there's no margin to be had to make their ventures worthwhile because it's subsidized. And so there is that conundrum, right, of the public good with the private good. But let me just open up here. I had some questions prepared for Ike and Horst as well, but I want to give you all in the audience the floor before we monopolize this. Any questions from the audience? Anything? You can readily unmute yourself and just speak. I think this is small enough of a circle that we can be intimate about it. Any questions for our audience? For our panel, I should say. Okay. Why don't while you think, I mean, Michaela, did you have a question? Otherwise, I'll revert to mine.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question that I put in the chat as well. These carbon removal measures or technologies that we don't have yet, or not well to use it in a big scale. If we have to wait for this, but get it going and get the measures going to achieve that, are there any ways to pay for those in the interim, or have tax deductions or something like that to just get us there?
There are many opportunities to do that. I will address two that are, well, one in particular is in the private sector. So far I've addressed the opportunity to channel public funds to amplify this opportunity. But the private sector is moving in a big way. And as all of you know, all the different commitments that have been made by major companies, not in the fossil industry and not even in the ag industry, that are committing to carbon neutrality, if not carbon negativity. And those companies are becoming customers for agricultural carbon removal. And specifically, there are several, but one in particular that I'm thinking of, companies that are currently paying farmers for carbon removal that is extrapolated based on practices. They have a sophisticated algorithm that calculates what are the changes farmers are making in their practices on what kind of crop and what kind of soil, and extrapolating what kind of carbon removal can be predicted and paying farmers on that basis. The company that I suggest you look up for the model that I'm referring to is called Nori, N-O-R-I. We've worked extensively with them in policy advocacy, and I think very highly of them.
Great. We have, yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Nicole, something that occurred to me, and and maybe you can shed some light on this, just as rooftop solar has the potential, at least in, in sunny areas like California, the West, the Southwest, to make a significant contribution to the energy input. Is there a similar factor for agricultural carbon sequestration, where small scale, millions and millions of small scale operations could make a sizable dent in the decarbonization effort?
Well, you're touching on a really touchy issue, actually. And that is that as we advance policy to reward farmers or farm operations for carbon removal, clearly the entities that stand to gain the most are the entities that control the most acreage. And that means agribusiness. And there's a real struggle between agribusiness and mid and smaller sized operations in this country, and just how centralized should our food and other agricultural product production be, and who should benefit from the funds that flow to this. So I would say to you that since you specified thousands, if not millions of small inputs, the idea of a carbon co-op or multiple carbon co-ops based on region is one that we're developing right now in order to address the difference of access to this kind of program between a 100,000 acre operation versus 1,000 acre operation, and how to participate. It's a challenge that we're looking at, but we don't have the law in the books yet.
So for instance, what you're saying is that like I'm an olive grower in my spare time, and I grow down in the Santa Cruz Mountains. There are probably 20 or 30 small olive growers there. Olives are a carbon negative crop because there's no till, and
it's a tree.
It's a tree.
Yeah.
And so would a co-op be, say, the Santa Cruz Olive Growers Association would form a carbon co-op and get some sort of tax?
Exactly. Or it could be a California olive growers. And the reason I say that is the entity that would ultimately reward you would most likely be the state of California through the Department of Food and Ag, which, by the way, I've spent a great deal of time with in the last year, and I would be delighted to have your partnership in advancing the notion of crop-specific carbon co-ops in California. You can reach me via Nicole at NicoleLederer.com.
Let me hook in here.
There's a very,
I do.
if I can just inject a short remark to this topic, there's a very, very interesting development in rapidly growing plants. I know it especially rapidly growing trees. There are trees like Paulownia, which grow 10 times as fast as normal trees. And of course, this is as well a very, very exciting area for carbon capture. So not to forget, and actually olive trees and these rapidly growing trees, this is of course the same thing. But if you go really for the carbon capture effect, that might be something to look into.
Let me hint at a bit of attention that I'm seeing here. And Mariana, I do see your hand. I want to call on you. But Christian equally had put some questions into the chat for a while now. I want to sort of bring us together on one tension I see. I heard the theme of small versus large, right? We want to get entrepreneurs, we want to get the small growers, we want to incentivize them to help us sort of kindle that flame, okay? And yet, we also know that in order to scale, we need reach and we need size and we need volume. And entrepreneurs, maybe not you, Tony, because it's more of a, as I gauge, more of a hobby, but tech entrepreneurs anyway need an exit somewhere at some point, or at least some distribution channel to scale out, right? So this creative tension of wanting to instigate a smaller entrepreneurship activity because we want more decentralized power in an industry, and yet we're relying on the big players to help us scale out. I wonder, Eike and Horst, how you view sort of that creative tension, and then I'm happy to come back around to Nicole, but bring you into this conversation.
I wanted to make exactly a point on this small versus large, and since water came up as a theme, and I believe we see in California now this transition from a 20th century highly centralized water system, which means you build big dams and then pipe in massive pipelines water through a centrally controlled system from Northern California to Southern California. This is a centralized system, and the decentralized system will be to develop technologies that allow local water cleanup at the source. And there are many sources of water that are just not perfectly clean drinking water, but that can be used. So for example, you could clean up brackish water in the bay and use it for agricultural purpose. And in particular in California, an completely untapped source of water is the water that is used in the oil production. What people forget is that California is still the third largest oil producing state in the US, and a lot of water is wasted literally by pumping into oil wells in order to enhance the oil production. So there could be local cleanup as well, and this water could be also used for agriculture use. So we see a huge change in that sector from a centralized to decentralized system coming. Simply the scarcity of water and the necessity of doing something different forces us. I would expect the same thing. We see it, of course, in energy with rooftop solar and other local production, and I would not be surprised to see this in agriculture with much more local production.
Yeah, and this is as well an answer to a question from Christian Baslav. I think what Horst pointed out is absolutely right. You know, renewable energy and everything around it has the big potential of decentralized industry, decentralized economies. And one of the most exciting areas there are, of course, the parts of the world which are poor, like Africa and India, where they don't have any power right now, and where we don't need to start with creating a centralized grid. We can start immediately with decentralized power production, storage, and distribution. And actually, the area we are talking about has both these aspects. You know, you can have decentralized units, you can have decentralized systems, but on the other hand, for some things, like for instance, the production of cost-effective photovoltaics, there's a key issue is to scale up to the production quantities needed. So basically, there you need as well companies which are able to generate the interest in investors, not only to give the first $1 or $5 billion, but the next 50 or $100 million. Did I say billion? I meant million, of course, in order to really reach the size of scale which can be cost effective. But I think you have this wide portfolio starting from the startups, which really can be extremely distributed, decentralized, to production, cost-effective production, where we have to face the situation that it can only compete with what is going on the world market if it is really at large enough volume and centralized.
And that's always the conundrum. You know, I remember being on the Eco Challenge board of a big global tech company, and you know, I asked them about water because we got so many submissions on water solutions, and they said, you know, the problem for us as a large multinational is we don't see a path to a multi-billion-dollar business. And so, you know, their qualification hurdle was always multi-billion-dollar businesses by corporate policy. But if you always just think in those dimensions, which, you know, fine, go knock yourself out, you will never start small, right? And it may not be a multi-billion-dollar business, but it could still be hugely impactful. But then the entrepreneur is left with the question, how do I scale? How do I exit? How do I make this worthwhile, commensurate with my risk, right? And I think that gets back to what Nicole was saying. We got to strike the right deals between the right parties, right? Yeah. Marianne, you had your hand up as well. I want to get to you now, if you can.
Yes, I'm speaking not just as a business professional, but for 20 years I lived on an organic farm in Northern California, and my spouse was a big activist in the organic movement. So we really came up against a lot of challenges, and I think you really have to realize that the small farms, as you said, Olaf, are really against big ag, and big ag just carries so much weight. And that leads you to the water issue, sharing water. And you have to know who all the players are. And even on a local level, you've got to go to those meetings and get in bed with certain people, or else they'll run roughshod over you. So it's quite the fight. But I think some of the solutions are really collaborations. Enter wherever you can, but get where the decision makers are, And I think it's corporate sponsorships. If you can stomach it, you get with some of the better guys. And watch for the wine industry and the cannabis industry. People think of them as the good guys, but they're such water hogs and they've got big lobbyists. So put your big pants on.
Thank you, Mariana. I think we will definitely keep an eye on those. I agree. I'm watching the clock here and I know we're coming up on the hour. We are at the hour now. Let me, though, maybe wrap it up in sort of one central observation, which is that really the gating item to scalability is how do we aggregate enough power for the smaller entrepreneurs? And frankly, we shouldn't always just have a tech mindset where everybody wants to become a billionaire. But what do we do, Mariana, with your business, with Tony's business, with a farmer who might want a good income, but they don't dream of going global, multi-billion-dollar business proposition? How do we create enough negotiation power to cut deals with the bigger players that we need to scale out? And I'm going to come full circle maybe to Nicole to close us out before we go into networking. Nicole, you are advising Washington, do we need Washington to do this to sort of incentivize these deal structures? Because it sounds like a very tedious undertaking, right? What we're describing, right? How do you aggregate enough power amongst all the small guys to talk to the big boys, as it were? Do you force that through regulatory measures?
There is a lot of opportunity at both the federal and state level. And there's a lot of movement. For example, I think everyone is familiar with the low carbon fuel standard in California. That policy here and in Oregon has actually created a strong market for low carbon feedstock being produced in the Midwest. And now the Midwestern states are looking at creating their own low carbon feedstock, low carbon fuel standards, so as to create a bigger market for their local product. There's also a huge movement that we are participating in to amend crop insurance at the federal level, but with state-based incentives to recognize the reduction in crop risk by deploying regenerative ag practices. So through crop insurance, through private markets, through policy at the federal level, specifically through the Farm Bill, but also through legislation in Congress, it's possible to advance this step by step on a multi-front basis. And I do want to emphasize that the private sector has a very big role to play here in defining the value of that agricultural commodity, carbon removal, and purchasing that as in an offset capacity. And the last thing I want to say here is to build on what Mariana said, it is really important to understand the diversity of players here. And the blowback on the issue of offsets intersects with environmental justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, which have become extremely front burner right now and will probably remain so. And so it's important to define that the offsets, the product that we're paying for is not actually enabling more emissions to continue to take place, particularly in places where people who don't have political power continue to suffer from those emissions directly. And rather than start this conversation at the end of a program, my answer is that there is enormous opportunity to advance this at every level of government and in the private sector with an understanding of who it affects and a determination that it should benefit everyone.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Very powerful, and to vastly overgeneralize, clearly what you're saying is, look, we need the federal government involved to incentivize everybody across the board, including the big national and multinational players, but then set incentives on a localized level to speak to the entrepreneurs, the individual growers, the individual innovators, and make that, facilitate or at least provide guardrails and incentives and motivation for the two sides to talk to each other. I think that's a key takeaway and a key learning here today. I will need to close us out here now, almost on time, a few minutes over. But before I want to, first of all, of course, I want to thank you, the audience, for coming to us today. Immensely important topic. We'll be broadcasting this meeting as well to get greater reach. I want to thank my panelists here. you know, Nicole, Ike, and Horst. And I want to thank my co-chair, my partner in crime in this, of course, Tracy Gross and GABA, Michaela and Ivy and Caroline. A few words from Tracy, and then we'll break out on into networking. No? No, no, just roll. Okay, she's signaling me to just roll. I think we're all accessible to you, okay? I think Nicole has said she won't be able to stay for networking. I will have a few minutes, but you can also reach us by email, and I am going to put my email into the chat function. I don't know, Nicole, if yours is already in there, but you can always reach me and I can relay messages to my brothers and sisters on this panel, okay? With that said, thanks again to everybody. Thank you. And shall we go into networking with a virtual cocktail?
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Yeah,
bye-bye, everybody.
let's do that.